The sound I remember is footsteps, my own footsteps, the click of my heels on the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway in the house where I was born. A measured sound, deliberate, not hurried, not slow. The pace of a woman who has made a decision and is carrying it out and will not look back, because looking back would require her to reconsider, and she cannot afford to reconsider because what she has just done cannot be undone, and what she has just refused cannot be granted. And the woman dying in the bed behind her will be dead before morning, and there will be no second opportunity for mercy. October the 3rd, 1891. I walked out of my mother's room at 2:30 in the afternoon. She died at 6:45 that evening, alone. The hired nurse was present, but the nurse was not family, and my mother died without family beside her because her daughter, her eldest daughter, the one she had asked to stay, had walked down the hallway and descended the stairs and gone into the garden and sat on the stone bench beside the boxwood hedge and waited for it to be over. I was 47 years old. I was not a child. I was not confused. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what it would cost, and I did it anyway, because the alternative was to do something I could not do, which was to lie to my mother while she was dying, and I could not lie to her, even though the lie she wanted was small and the truth I insisted on was enormous, and perhaps, the lie would have been the kinder thing. I have spent 36 years considering this, and I have not reached a conclusion, and I am 83 years old, and I do not expect to reach one before I am finished. I will tell you what happened in that room, but I will need to tell it more than once, because the first telling will not be sufficient. The first telling will make me appear cold. The second telling will make me appear justified. The third telling will make you unsure. The fourth will leave you where I am, which is nowhere, which is standing in a hallway that has no end. The first time, my mother in the bed. The room smelled of camphor and lavender, and beneath those smells another smell that I will not describe, except to say that it was the smell of a body that is no longer maintaining itself, that has begun the process of departure while still technically occupied. She was 68 years old, and the cancer had been working on her for 14 months, and there was very little left of the woman she had been. Her hands on the coverlet were thin enough to see the bones working beneath the skin. Her face had narrowed to its architecture, the skull becoming visible beneath the flesh, as though she were slowly being revealed, as though the woman I had known was being removed to expose whatever was underneath. She was lucid. That was the cruelty of it. Some people lose their minds before they lose their bodies, and that is a mercy of a kind, because they do not have to be present for the final negotiations. My mother was present, entirely, terribly present. Her eyes were clear. Her voice, though weak, was coherent. She knew who I was. She knew what day it was. She knew she was dying, and she had something to ask me. She asked it. I stood up. I walked out. That is the first telling, and it is accurate as far as it goes, which is not far enough. I need to go back before the room and the bed and the camphor and the footsteps, back to the beginning, or what I consider the beginning, which is the house and the family and the world that produced the woman who walked down that hallway. I was born Rosamond Eliza Yancey on the 11th of July, 1844, in Fayette County, Kentucky, in the heart of the Bluegrass. I need to explain what the Bluegrass was because it matters. It was not simply a place, it was a condition, a way of existing in the world that was particular to that region of Kentucky and that era and that class, and that has not survived in any form I recognize, though people in Lexington still believe it has. The Bluegrass was horse country, rolling green land, stone fences built by enslaved men whose names were not recorded on the deeds that bounded the properties they built, white-painted farmhouses set back from the roads at distances calculated to suggest both accessibility and remove. It was a landscape designed to communicate prosperity and taste and permanence. Everything in the Bluegrass was designed to communicate. The houses communicated wealth. The horses communicated ambition. The families communicated lineage. and the women communicated contentment whether they were content or not, because contentment was what was required of them, and what was required was what was delivered. My father was Judge Arden Yancey, Circuit Court Judge, Fayette County, a man of considerable reputation and considerable presence. He was tall, over 6 feet, which was unusual for that era, and he carried himself with the specific posture of a man who knows he is being observed and has arranged himself accordingly. His voice was the thing people remembered most, deep, resonant, controlled, the kind of voice that fills a courtroom without effort, that makes whatever it says sound considered and authoritative and true. He used that voice the way a carpenter uses a fine tool, with precision and awareness of its capabilities. He could persuade anyone of anything. I know this because he persuaded me for 20 years that he was the finest man in Kentucky, and I believed him with the absolute conviction of a daughter who has not yet learned that fathers are capable of sustained deception. He called me his little magistrate. I was the eldest of 3 children, the only daughter. My brothers, Arden Jr. and Philip, were born in 1846 and 1849. I was the one who accompanied my father to the courthouse, who sat in the gallery and watched him preside, who listened to him explain the principles of law and justice at the dinner table with an authority that seemed to extend beyond the courtroom into the fundamental nature of things. Truth matters, Rosamond. A man's word is his only real property. Everything else can be taken. But what you say and whether you mean it, that belongs to you alone. He said these things, and I absorbed them, and I built myself around them, and they became the load-bearing walls of my character, and I did not discover until I was grown that the man who laid those walls did not live inside them himself. My mother was Lenora Yancey, born Lenora Ashby. She was beautiful in the manner that bluegrass women were expected to be beautiful, which is to say she was composed. Her beauty was a matter of arrangement rather than feature. She arranged her hair, her dress, her expression, her posture, her voice, her household, her life into a pattern of such consistent elegance that you did not notice any single element because the whole was so seamless. She was the perfect wife for a man like my father, which is to say she was the perfect surface for a life that did not bear close examination. We held 14 enslaved people on the Yancey property at the time of my birth. I state this plainly because it is a fact and because the world I grew up in was built on this fact, and pretending otherwise would be the kind of lie I am constitutionally unwilling to tell. I will not describe the people we held in bondage except to say that they were people and that the system that held them was evil, and that the prosperity and the elegance and the stone fences and the thoroughbred horses were all purchased with their labor and their lives. And my family benefited from this arrangement for generations, and I have not made my peace with that, and I do not expect to. The first thing I noticed was in 1856. I was 12 years old. My father had been away for what my mother described as court business in Lexington, which was 12 miles east, and which contained the larger courthouse where appellate matters were heard. He was away frequently, 2 nights, sometimes 3. My mother managed these absences with her customary composure, maintaining the household, overseeing the farm operations in his absence, presenting to the world the image of a woman whose husband was performing important work elsewhere and who was entirely at ease with this arrangement. I noticed because I was 12, and 12-year-old girls notice things that their mothers prefer they would not. I noticed that my father's court business in Lexington coincided with a particular pattern, always midweek, always 2 or 3 nights, always returning in a particular mood that was lighter than his usual temperament, as though whatever he had been doing in Lexington had relaxed something in him that the household could not relax. I noticed that my mother's composure during these absences had a quality to it that differed from her ordinary composure, a tightness around the eyes, a precision in her movements that suggested she was concentrating very hard on appearing normal, which is what people do when the thing they are concealing requires constant attention. I did not understand at 12 what I was seeing. I understood at 16. A conversation overheard between my mother and her sister, my Aunt Josephine, during a visit. They did not know I was in the adjacent room. Aunt Josephine said, "Lenora, how long are you going to endure this?" My mother said, "As long as is necessary." Josephine said, "The whole county will know eventually." My mother said, "The whole county will know what I permit them to know, and what I permit them to know is that Judge Yancey and his wife are devoted to one another and their family. That is what they will know because that is what they will see." And that was the end of the conversation. I was 16 and I understood then that my father had a woman in Lexington, that my mother knew, that my mother had decided to maintain the fiction, that the elegant life I inhabited, the stone house and the thoroughbred horses and the dinners and the church and the Sunday drives and the Christmas gatherings and the whole elaborate performance of the Yancey family was exactly that, a performance, staged by my mother with my father's tacit cooperation for an audience of everyone we knew. Before we continue, a quick word. I've released 14 full recordings that will never be on YouTube. These are the voices too personal, too raw to share publicly, completely unedited, nothing cut. If you want access, the link is in the description. It's called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us keep making these videos. All right, back to the story. I learned the details later, incrementally, through overheard conversations, through the observations of a girl who had learned to watch her parents with the analytical attention of someone who knows the surface is not the substance. My father had maintained a woman in Lexington named Clara Moss for the better part of 15 years. She was a seamstress. He had set her up in a small house on Short Street. They had two children who were my father's children, half-siblings I had never met, who lived 12 miles away in a house my father paid for, with money that should have been part of our household. The scope of this deception was what destroyed me, not the fact that my father had strayed. I was old enough by 18 to understand that men did this, that the world was arranged to permit it, that bluegrass society in particular operated on an understanding that certain behaviors among men of standing were tolerated, provided they were conducted with sufficient discretion. What destroyed me was the duration. 15 years. My entire conscious life, from the time I was old enough to form memories until the time I was old enough to understand what I was remembering, my father had been lying. Every evening at the dinner table, every speech about truth and integrity, every lesson about the importance of a man's word, every time he said truth matters, Rosamond, he was speaking from inside a lie so comprehensive that it had its own house, its own address, its own children. And my mother had helped him. That is the part I could not forgive, not the affair, the complicity. My mother had known for years and had chosen, deliberately and with full awareness, to maintain the performance. She had smiled at church beside a man who kept another family. She had hosted dinners for the county's prominent citizens while knowing that her husband left those dinners and drove to Lexington to sleep in another woman's bed. She had looked me in the eye every day of my life and allowed me to believe that my family was what it appeared to be when she knew it was not. She had raised me inside a lie and never told me I was breathing fabricated air. I married in 1867 a man named Horace Pritchard, a lawyer in Lexington, decent, somewhat dull, possessing the specific virtue of being exactly what he appeared to be, which was the quality I valued above all others. Horace said what he meant. Horace did not maintain secret households. Horace was not interesting, but Horace was honest, and after the Yancey education in dishonesty, honesty was the only thing I required. We had 2 children. We lived quietly. I did not discuss my father. The war had come and gone by then. Kentucky's war was different from the rest of the South's. We were a border state, officially Union, divided in fact. My father had supported the Confederacy privately while maintaining his judicial position, which required a loyalty oath to the Union. Another lie, another performance. After the war, his Confederate sympathies became known, as such things always become known, and he was removed from the bench. The enslaved people we had held were freed, as they should have been long before any war required it. The property diminished, the horses were sold. The stone house remained, but it was a shell enclosing a family that had already collapsed from within. The Lexington situation became public in 1873 during a property dispute. Clara Moss, my father's Lexington woman, sued his estate's creditors over the house on Short Street, claiming it had been given to her. The suit was reported in the Lexington newspaper. My mother's name appeared in connection with it. The fiction she had maintained for 20 years was destroyed in a paragraph of newspaper type. My father died in 1878. He was 68. He had been living apart from my mother for 4 years, not divorced. Divorce was unthinkable in our world, but separated in everything except legal fact. He died in a boarding house in Frankfort. I did not attend his funeral. My brothers did. My mother did. I did not. I could not stand beside his coffin and pretend to mourn a man I no longer recognized as the person who had taught me that truth matters, because the man who taught me that had been a fiction as elaborate and as sustained as everything else about him. Now, the second telling of what happened in that room, October 1891, my mother in the bed. The cancer had been diagnosed the previous August, a growth in her abdomen that the physician in Lexington described in the careful, indirect language physicians used when there was nothing to be done. My mother received this news with the composure she had applied to everything else in her life, and proceeded to die over the course of 14 months with the same organizational efficiency she had brought to managing a household. I came to stay with her in September of 1891, when it became clear the end was approaching. My brothers had come earlier and left. They had families, responsibilities. I stayed because I was the daughter and because in our world daughters stayed. I managed the hired nurse. I managed the household. I sat with my mother in the afternoons, and we spoke of things that did not matter: the garden, the weather, the children's children, the comfortable irrelevancies that people discuss when the relevant thing is too large to fit through the opening of ordinary conversation. On October the 3rd, in the early afternoon, my mother changed the subject. She had been speaking about the boxwood hedge, which needed trimming, and then she stopped and her face shifted, and she looked at me with an expression that I recognized as preparatory, the expression of someone who is about to say something they have been composing for a long time. She said, "Rosamond, I need to speak to you about your father." I said nothing. My body stiffened. I could feel it stiffen, the muscles of my back and shoulders contracting, the old familiar armor assembling itself. She said that she had thought a great deal in these final months about her life and about the people in it and about the things that had gone wrong and the things that had gone right. She said she had made her peace with your father's failings, which was the word she used, failings, as though maintaining a second family for 15 years was a lapse in judgment rather than a sustained campaign of deception. She said she had forgiven him, that the forgiveness had not come easily, but it had come, and it had brought her something she described as relief, a setting down of something heavy, a lightness she had not expected. And then she said, "I want you to forgive him too, Rosamond. It is my dying wish. I cannot go peacefully knowing you carry this. Please, forgive your father. For me, let it go." She looked at me. Her eyes, which had been clouding in recent weeks, were clear, focused. She was asking me with everything she had left, which was not much, but was enough to fill that room with the weight of her wanting. I sat in the chair beside her bed, and I felt something tear inside me. Not break, tear. The way fabric tears, along a line of weakness that has been there all along, waiting for sufficient force. On one side of the tear was the desire to give my mother what she wanted. She was dying. She would be dead in hours. I could say yes. I could say, "I forgive him, Mother." 4 words. They would cost me nothing except the truth. And the truth was a currency that I had valued more than anything else my entire life because my father had taught me to value it. And the irony of that was so bitter it tasted like metal in my mouth. On the other side of the tear was the impossibility. I could not say it. Not because I was cruel, not because I wanted to punish my mother, because the words "I forgive him" were not true, and I could not say words that were not true to a dying woman. To lie to her in her final hours would be to do exactly what she had done to me for 20 years, to smile and perform and say what was expected while knowing it was false. I would not do to her what she had done to me. I would not give her a comfortable fiction and call it love. I wanted to find something in between, some sentence that was both honest and kind. I opened my mouth. I searched for it. Something like, "I understand why you feel that way, Mother." Something like, "I will try." Something that acknowledged her wish without granting it, that offered comfort without requiring me to speak words I did not mean. But everything I assembled in my mind collapsed before it reached my mouth. Every compromise felt like a smaller lie, and I could not calibrate how much lying was acceptable even in extremity. I could not find the line between mercy and dishonesty because in that moment, in that room with my mother's eyes on me and my father's voice in my memory, saying truth matters. Rosamond, the line did not exist. I stood up. I looked at her. She saw it in my face. I know she saw it because her expression changed from hope to something else, something I have been trying to name for 36 years, and the closest I have come is recognition. She recognized what I was doing. She recognized it because she had raised me to be incapable of it, and she had raised me inside a house built on the opposite of it, and perhaps she understood in that moment that my inability to lie was the one true thing her household had produced, or perhaps she did not understand. Perhaps she saw only her daughter refusing her dying wish, and felt only the abandonment of it. I do not know. I will never know. I walked out. The footsteps, click of heels on hardwood, down the hallway, 14 steps to the top of the stairs. I counted them then, and I have counted them since. 14 steps, down the stairs, through the parlor, through the kitchen, out the back door, into the garden, to the stone bench beside the boxwood hedge that needed trimming. I sat down. The afternoon was warm for October. The light was the particular gold that Kentucky light becomes in autumn, when the haze from the curing barns fills the air with the sweet smell of drying tobacco. I sat there and I waited. At 6:45 the nurse came to the garden door. She did not need to speak. I could see it in her face. I stood up and went inside and climbed the stairs, 14 steps, and walked down the hallway and entered my mother's room, and she was gone. Her face was composed, arranged. Even in death she maintained the surface. The eyes were closed, the hands were folded on the coverlet. She looked like a woman who had simply decided to stop performing and had set the whole production aside and departed. I should tell you now what I learned later, what my sister-in-law told me 3 years after my mother's death. What added the final layer to this story and made the simple act of walking out of that room infinitely more complicated than it already was. Clara Moss, my father's Lexington woman, died in 1882 in poverty. After my father's death and the collapse of his finances, the house on Short Street was lost. Clara had no resources of her own. The 2 children, my half-siblings, a boy and a girl whose names I learned only after my mother's death, were placed in the Lexington Orphan Asylum in 1879 when Clara could no longer provide for them. My mother sent money to that orphanage regularly, for years, from her own diminished resources, from the remnants of the Yancey estate, from what little she had. She sent money to provide for the children of the woman her husband had kept. She did this quietly, through the church, without acknowledgment, without anyone knowing except her minister and apparently my brother Arden, who discovered the arrangement when settling her accounts after her death. She had cared for them, the children of the betrayal, the living evidence of her husband's deception. She had fed them and clothed them through the orphanage, and she had done it in silence, because silence was how my mother did everything that mattered, and because perhaps she understood that those children were innocent of their parentage and that their suffering was not their fault, and that someone should look after them and no one else was going to. This was why she could forgive my father. She had converted his betrayal into an act of care. She had taken the worst thing he did, and she had redeemed it, not through words, but through money sent to an orphanage, through years of quiet provision for children who did not know who was providing for them. She had earned her forgiveness through action, the way a person earns anything that matters, by paying for it with something real. And she wanted me to have what she had found, that relief, that lightness. She was not asking me to forgive my father because he deserved it. She was asking me to forgive him because she knew what carrying the alternative felt like, and she had found a way out of it, and she wanted her daughter to find the way out too. She was trying in her final hours to give me the only gift she had left, which was the knowledge that forgiveness was possible, and that it did not require the person being forgiven to be worthy of it. I did not know about the orphanage money when I walked out of that room. I learned it 3 years later. By then, the footsteps were already installed in me, 14 steps down the hallway every night, the sound replaying behind my eyes before sleep, and the additional information did not alter the replay. It only added another layer to it, another dimension of things I did not know when I made my decision and cannot retroactively incorporate into a decision already made. Would I have stayed if I had known about the orphanage? Would that knowledge have been sufficient to crack the wall of my honesty and let some mercy through? I've asked myself this many times. I think the answer is no. I think I would have still been unable to say the words because the words would still have been untrue, and the woman who could not speak untrue words would not have been altered by additional context, however moving. But I am not certain, and the uncertainty is its own punishment. Horace died in 1911. Quiet man, honest man. Died as he lived, without drama, without deception. I have been alone since then, living in this house in Lexington, maintained by my son Charles, who manages a bank and visits on Sundays, and who knows the outlines of this story, but not the interior of it, because the interior is mine, and I have not shared it until now. I am 83 years old. I have carried 14 steps for 36 years. I hear them every night. The click of heels on hardwood, my own heels, my own hallway, my own decision, made in the fraction of a moment that separates standing from walking, the fraction in which I chose honesty over mercy, and left my mother to die alone because I could not say 4 words that were not true. My father taught me that truth matters. My mother taught me that appearance matters. They were both wrong, or they were both right, or they were each right about different things, and I inherited from both of them in proportions that left me unable to navigate the one moment in my life when truth and mercy stood opposite each other and demanded that I choose. I chose truth. I chose it because my father's voice was in my head saying a man's word is his only real property, which is a fine principle articulated by a man who did not honor it, and I honored it for him in his absence at his wife's deathbed, and the honoring cost me the last 4 hours of my mother's life and the chance to hold her hand while she died. I gave my mother honesty when she asked for mercy. I have never determined which she needed more. I suspect she needed mercy. I suspect I was wrong, but I could not lie to her. That was the one thing I could not do, even for her, even at the end. Even knowing that the truth I clung to was a principle I had learned from a man who did not practice it, and the mercy I refused was the one thing the woman who had raised me inside a lie was asking for honestly, the only honest request she had ever made of me, and I denied it. I hear the footsteps every night, 14 steps down the hallway, the sound of my heels on hardwood, the sound getting farther away. I have walked down that hallway every night for 36 years, and I have never reached the door. I will walk it tonight. I will walk it tomorrow night. I will walk it every night I have remaining, which at 83 cannot be many. And when I die, if there is anything after this, I expect the first sound I hear will be footsteps. My own, still walking, still 14 steps from the end of a hallway I cannot finish crossing and cannot turn back from, because to turn back would be to lie, and I cannot lie, and to keep walking is to leave her, and I left her, and the hallway does not end, and the footsteps do not stop, and that is what honesty sounds like when mercy was what was required. 14 steps. I have counted them 13,140 times. Once for every night since October the 3rd, 1891. The number will increase by 1 tonight and tomorrow night, and every night until the counting stops.